I'd like to welcome you to Edmonds Center for the Arts as well. Thanks for joining us. I'll hand this microphone off to you in a minute. I also want to thank Alicia Crank for her leadership and partnership. Alicia creates conversations that lead to deeper understanding and connections, and they help us all build a stronger community. On behalf of everyone here at ECA, Alicia, I just want to thank you for your work and for your partnership with us. And finally, I would like to pause for a moment and acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional, culture-rich, indigenous homelands of the Snohomish tribe and their successors, the Coast Salish people. We celebrate the Coast Salish, who represent a large collection of many tribes with distinct cultures and languages that have been stewards of the land and sea in our region since time immemorial. At ECA, we are committed to working with local tribes to continually acknowledge and honor their ancestral lands. Again, thank you all for being here tonight. I would not be doing my job if I didn't offer at least one small shameless plug. All right, for Edmonds Center for the Arts, if you have not been here before, or those of you at home have not been with us before, Edmonds Center for the Arts hosts a tremendous mix of music, theater, dance, comedy, really amazing experiences in this room. We hope that you'll come back and join us. We have a summer series on the horizon of 5 shows, 4 of which will be taking place outdoors in our beautiful parking lot with our beautiful view. And then our 22-23 season will begin in September with an incredible lineup. So I hope you will take a moment to visit our website, download our app. Our app is a great way to be able to see what's coming up, and I hope we'll see you again very soon. So thank you for being here tonight. Again, for those of you with us at the theater tonight, we look forward to also seeing you in the lobby after the show. We got some food and probably a little too much. So I hope that you will join us outside, spend some time with us, and discuss and share our experience tonight with each other. And so thank you. I will hand it off to you, Alicia, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight and those that are watching virtually. You know, again, I need to thank Joe and the ECA. They have been great partners with me and others in this community for years. The diversity of their programming over the past few years has been phenomenal, and they've always been open to partnering and doing things like this. When I came up with the idea of doing this conversation tonight, I will tell you, when I came up with it, it was really just a thought, and I just put it out there, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if anyone would want to partner and do this, and the very first person I emailed was Philip, the publisher, at the Herald, and I want to say within 20 minutes, he responded back and copied John and said, "We're doing this, let's go." And John and I have been meeting almost weekly since February, to pull this together, and the same thing with our panelists. The hardest thing, anyone at event plans knows that usually the hardest thing is getting the people to participate, to be the speakers. And I have been super fortunate over all the stuff I've done in this community that's been the easiest. Everyone said yes, and they said it immediately, even before we locked down a date. So I am incredibly grateful for all of the persons that are on stage and the organizations that also came through to help underwrite this so that we can always present this for free. To audience members, both in person and virtually. So WSU Everett, Everett Herald, Alaska Airlines, Everett, Snow Isle Libraries, and League of Women Voters, Snohomish County. Again, thank you so much for believing in this conversation. Bridging the gap and the theme around this actually came for me this time last year when the state and the city obviously also was thinking about making Juneteenth a recognized holiday. And the mayor of Edmonds, the city, decided, to try to get ahead of that, and they did, and made it, a holiday here, then it became state and obviously federal. And one of the local newspapers did an article about it about this time last year and asked for my opinion on it. And I think I said something to the effect of, they're so close together, and my hope is that we as a community and other communities can find a way to kind of bridge the gap between the two so that we can celebrate them equally and also learn as well. And so I just kind of remembered that quote and built this around that. And so now we are celebrating federally 2 Independence Days. But one of the things that came out of that too was, for lack of a better word, ignorance around, what is the difference? Some people were saying, why do we need 2 Independence Days? We already have one. We already have Emancipation Day. It's just Emancipation Part 2. It's like, I really just felt this need to find an educational component around this discussion, because I knew there would be events around Juneteenth, which there were, and there's always going to be events around 4th of July, which there will be, but there was no conversation, there's no educational piece. So that's what tonight is about. Tonight is not about changing anyone's mind or forcing a certain way of thinking, but we just want to provide you with knowledge. And knowledge from different points of view, from the youth point of view, from educational point of view, from a historical point of view, from corporate point of view. And hopefully this will promote a conversation beyond this. If you could take back to your families, to your organizations, to your neighborhoods, and to your communities. So with that, let's get started. And so first, I'm going to ask all of our presenters to self-introduce so you can know who they are and where they're from, and then we will go into the Q&A. Hopefully you did get the email, around this as well. We will be doing Q&A, so hopefully you will know to use from your phones or your computers at home. If you go to slido.com, and use the participant code, which I will say at the end of the introductions. Anytime during the conversation, if you have a question that you would like to have asked to any of the panelists, I will be regularly checking my phone, so I won't be texting. I'm checking Slido for your question, and we will try to interject those questions as they fit into the conversation. So I will start from this end with self-introductions from John.
Hi, I'm John Bauer. I'm the opinion page editor for the Everett Herald. When I got the email from Alicia, I jumped at this because, I'm a 58-year-old man who, until recently, had not even heard the word Juneteenth. So I knew that this is a new concept for my community. I grew up in Everett, have lived have lived my entire life in Washington State, and I just, this is an important conversation, and I'm glad we're having it. So I will pass it along.
I'm Alicia Crank. I'm an 8-year resident in Edmonds, do a lot of stuff in the community. Professionally, I'm now the outgoing Chief Development Officer, which is just a fancy word for fundraiser, for an organization called At Work that supports individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And the incoming Executive Director of Seattle City Club that actually promotes conversations like this. So it's going to be fun to do what I like to do in my private time, to do it professionally. Like I said, I've been here 8 years. I like putting together these kind of conversations, and as I think Steve said to me, networking is my jam. So I love this, and again, I'm so happy to see your participation today.
Okay, I'm Paul Petrie, and I don't want to be petty, but these guys made me sit here. I wanted to sit on the end down there, and they made me sit by the principals here. Anyway, Paul Petrie, I am at Washington State University, Everett. I'm the chancellor there. I have been at Washington State University for about 17 years. Spent time on the Pullman campus as a professor and some time in our Vancouver campus prior to beginning to build Washington State University, Everett, and its ability to offer four-year higher education in Everett, Snohomish County, and the North Puget Sound region. I just want to say that I'm originally from Seattle. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Michelle Osborne, and
Please don't switch the microphone.
That doesn't work, right? Well, my family says I have a really loud voice and I don't need a microphone. But... Okay. Oh, there we go. Thank you. My name's Michelle Osborne. I'm the principal of Michelle M. Osborne, J.D. and Associates LLC. It's a consulting firm where I do a lot of work to eliminate gender violence, but also to look at issues relating to enhancing racial equity in our communities. I am a lawyer, but I like to tell everyone, don't worry, I'm a California lawyer, so I can't really do any damage in Washington State. But I do have a lot of background and interest in linking topics like looking at gender violence and also looking at how racism perpetuates and promotes gender violence. So I want to thank you for the opportunity, Alicia, to put together, again, some of these ideas about how we bridge the gap with the 4th of July and with Juneteenth and what that looks like for all of us. Don't touch it.
Yeah, just leave it.
Thanks.
Also not going to touch mine. And I'm glad I'm not the one that did that. So my name's Steve Nelson, and I am the Senior Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Specialist for Alaska Air Group, which includes Alaska Airlines and Horizon Air, your local carrier. Thank you so much. I've been there since August, having come from the Walt Disney World Resort in Florida, where I focused on advocacy work for individuals with disabilities for many years. Now I focus on our larger diversity, equity, inclusion strategy for Alaska. I focus specifically with Horizon Air, with our corporate back office employees for Alaska and for our disability inclusion strategy. So that includes a lot of facilitation, teaching, looking at data, and helping have conversations like this with our employees. So I also thank you for inviting me here, and thank you for sitting at the seat next to Alicia. I was the petty one.
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Delon Lewis. I'm a program specialist in the Diversity and Equity Center at Everett Community College. I also teach STEM 101, and I'm currently working on my master's degree in information technology management. I have 3 kids. Also own All Day Software and All Day Originals. I do web design and audio engineering and songwriting, so it gives me the ability to have a little bit of creative freedom when I'm not at work. And I'm also a brother of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated across down at Portland State University. I've been in Snohomish County for about 3 years now. Grew up in Seattle. I feel like that's always important to point out. We have a lot of people coming here, to see what we have going on. So it's always nice to, to meet locals and represent. And I'm just glad we having this conversation, because I think as we start to, everybody start to adopt Juneteenth in their lives, and we also have July 4th. I think it's important to make sure people don't feel like they have to choose. Like we can find ways to celebrate them both and honor them both. And I'm really glad to have this conversation and be here today. Thank you.
And last but not least, streaming in from her home, also in Seattle, is Bianca.
There she is.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'd like to first note that I'm recovering from COVID, so that's why I'm not in person, but I just want to thank Joey for all of the help with the audio, and then Alicia Crank for putting this together. It's just so nice to be here and to be with all of you. My name is Bianca Dang. I am an assistant professor and the Donald W. Logan Family Endowed Chair of American History at the University of Washington. I received my PhD in History and African American Studies from Yale University last year, and I teach courses at UW in African American History. Sorry, there's a little bit of reverb. Are you hearing the reverb too?
Nope, you're fine.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. So I teach courses in African American history, Caribbean history, and global freedom movements. And so my current manuscript is entitled Making Meaningful Freedom, Land, Labor, and Migration and Struggles for Autonomy in Haiti and the United States After Emancipation. And so I'm really, really thrilled to be part of this. I'm not from Seattle, I'm from Missouri, but I'm really excited to kind of expand my networks and both, I love working at UW, but I'm really excited to kind of have this kind of conversation with the broader community. So Thank you.
Thank you. And so you can see we have a wide range of information and knowledge coming across. So before we go on to the first question, again, if you want to submit a question, the site is slido.com, SLIDO.com. And the participant number that you want to use is 1249732. And that will connect you to the Bridging the Gap Q&A section that you can submit questions to. So I'm going to turn it over to John to make the first question.
Great. Bianca, let's start with you, and maybe a good place to start would just give us an overview of June 19th, and maybe kind of cover that June 19th wasn't the only Emancipation Day, that this was kind of a rolling thing across the slave states and even into the Union.
Absolutely. So I have my cheat sheet notes, but there's a lot of dates involved. So what's interesting about Juneteenth in kind of this longer history of freedom celebration throughout the United States is, as John mentioned, it's not the only one, but it is such an important holiday that is bringing kind of regionally people together that that's kind of where I'm going to focus on at the end. But so June 19th, known as Juneteenth, is a day of celebration marking the day that Colonel Gordon Granger presented his order number 3 on June 19th, 1865. And so this was over 2.5 years after Abraham Lincoln. Sorry, is there any way with the reverb? Oh, no. I'm so sorry.
Maybe turn down your computer volume a little bit. Did you try that?
I'll mute my volume? Okay, let me.
Joey's working on it.
Okay. So sorry, I'm just hearing everything twice.
Try now.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. That's great. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So June 19th, 1865 is when Colonel Granger, along with federal troops, arrived in Galveston, Texas. And so this was after the official end of the war, and also 2.5 years after the Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. And so this day marked when Granger produced his order number 3, which informed all of the people of Texas that the war was over, that the Union had won, and that that people who had been enslaved in Texas had been free since January 1st, 1863. And so in the first years after the war, Juneteenth was celebrated more locally in different parts of Texas as migration occurred. So Black folks moved from Galveston and other parts of Texas to southern Oklahoma, to Arkansas, to different parts of the South. The celebrations spread, but it wasn't the only celebration, as John had mentioned. So right after the war, there was actually a lot of emancipation celebrations. So April 16th is the day that Washington, D.C. Where slavery was abolished in Washington, D.C. in 1863. And so that was a major holiday in D.C. January 1st was a major holiday that many folks celebrated in the North because gradual emancipation in the North had happened throughout the early 19th century. August 1st, 1834 was the day that British abolition happened. And so a lot of people throughout the United States celebrated West Indian emancipation well past the American Civil War. And so there was many dates that people that African Americans, but also Black migrants to the United States too, after the war, celebrated emancipation because slavery and abolition and emancipation were hemispheric movements. And so thinking about kind of the transnational aspects of this is quite important, and how movements for Black freedom are so intertwined throughout the century, but into today. And so thinking about kind of how the all of these multiple emancipation movements, regionally, temporally, this is helps us see that freedom was not a stagnant process in the United States, as kind of our bridging the gap topic informs us, right? This Independence Day, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, did not mean freedom for everyone in the United States. And freedom across decades, across generations, has been fought for, and has been people have made claims to it, and it has been contested. And so thinking about kind of how these two dates help us see that American freedom, the freedom in the United States, has historically been constricted by one's race, gender, class, age, sexuality, and thinking about how having this holiday of Juneteenth as a federally recognized holiday is a way for all people in this country to understand that that the struggle for freedom did not end on July 4th, 1776, right? That it has been continued to be pursued, and that Black folks have been at the forefront of this. So,
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Bianca. And then I actually invite our other panelists if they want to add on to these questions, absolutely. And also, Bianca did mention that she has a manuscript, a document that she's been working on, and we're actually going to have that on the crankedup.co website tomorrow. So, like I said, there's a lot of great wealth and knowledge there, so thank you, Bianca. I think what's really interesting about what you just shared, and I think we all kind of in a pre-meeting, expressed this as well, is that, we all came into knowing what Juneteenth is differently and at different times. I grew up in Detroit. And again, I think it was more about celebration and education. And I think even just the things that Bianca already shared, I'm like, I didn't know that. I didn't get taught that. I didn't know about these different ones. So I'm going to target my next question to Michelle, but obviously anyone else can weigh in on this as well. And so, Michelle, my question for you is, among all the astonishing facts about Juneteenth, some of what we just heard, which is the one you think most people will be surprised by?
Well, thank you, my fellow Detroiter. I actually spent some time growing up in Michigan and Detroit before I came to Seattle. I think that one of the most astonishing things about Juneteenth is that a lot of us learned that that was the last group of enslaved people to be freed. When the Union general showed up in Galveston, as Bianca was just telling us, and issued the general order freeing the last of the slaves. Well, it turns out they weren't the last enslaved people in the United States to be freed after the Civil War. There were border states that did not, the Emancipation Proclamation did not apply to the border states because they weren't in rebellion, which is what the Emancipation Proclamation was meant to do, free enslaved people that were in rebellious states, the states we often think of as forming the Confederacy. But there were border states, Kentucky, Delaware, Missouri, and Maryland. So these enslaved folks were not actually freed until the 13th Amendment was ratified by the majority of the states at that time, and that was December 1865, I believe December 6th. So I think that might be a surprise to a lot of folks, that people stayed enslaved even after the end of the Civil War, even after June 19th, 1865, all the way to December 1865. And the other thing that we might learn about this is that not every state ratified the 13th Amendment. I mentioned Kentucky, and Kentucky finally ratified the 13th Amendment in 1976. And also, there's another state, our state of Mississippi, didn't ratify the 13th Amendment until 1995, but also didn't tell, I believe is it the clerk of Congress? They didn't get around to telling Congress that they had ratified finally the 13th Amendment from 1865. They didn't ratify it until 1776. They told the official federal folks that they needed to tell in 2013. So that it's not so much that meant that black people in Mississippi could still be legally enslaved so much as you can see the controversy still of this idea of freed people walking around after the so-called end of enslavement is still problematic for a lot of states as well as a lot of people. So that's one surprise I will throw out there that continues to astonish me, that there were people who were still enslaved after the end of the Civil War.
Okay.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that discovery, and I'm going to direct this at both Steve and Delon, because we've had some previous discussions about, what they were taught in school and how they developed their knowledge. And Steve, let's start with you. Tell us about and in Texas, actually, it was a state holiday in 1980, I believe. So what in growing up in Texas, what were you learning about Juneteenth?
Okay, well, you used the word problematic, so maybe I'll use that one. So I'll take you back 30-something years to school in Central Texas, where Juneteenth was a holiday that, as far as I knew, it was just a school holiday. I still had to go to school, but there'd be posters, there'd be banners, Juneteenth, Freedom Day. And what I knew as a young child was just that marked the end of slavery in the United States. What I learned about slavery by that time was basically that slaves existed. That was a bad thing. It happened for a brief period of history, and then it was done. And it happened, in Virginia, in Georgia, in Alabama, and all those places. Definitely did not happen in Texas. At least we never talked about it. And it was basically just, we did it. Texas, we're the ones. We ended it on Juneteenth. Well, I'm invited to a Juneteenth barbecue by a friend of mine, which seemed odd to me because who celebrates Juneteenth outside of school? My family didn't have barbecues for it. So I went, and, and we're very young, and we're just kind of enjoying the time, and his grandmother pulls me aside and asks what I know about Juneteenth. And of course, I'm just like, what the, Texas ended slavery on that day. And to say that she used that as a teaching moment for me is an understatement. So she helped me understand that that's not the truth, and that people had been freed for 2.5 years, and Texas just didn't do it. And now we're kind of having this revisionist history that, again, as a very young child, that was a difficult thing for me to understand, and I don't know that I even truly understood it in that moment. One thing she said before my friend's mom told her to leave me alone was that, there still isn't truly freedom. And I can remember, I can't remember a lot from that time because it was a while back, but I do remember asking my mom what that meant. I was told that there still really isn't freedom for the black community. And she said, well, yeah, the slavery is over. It ended. I don't know what that means. And it was kind of a shock for me. And it took a long time for me to really understand and to really learn. But for the next many years as I'm going through school, I took that as my teaching moment to learn, which can be tough because we really weren't being taught in school. I moved to Germany after that. Family was military family. And I went to Department of Defense schools, and we didn't talk about Juneteenth at all. That didn't exist anymore there. Slavery, again, it was a very quick, brief thing, so it took a lot of work, but I think that's really where the start of my kind of advocacy work started, was as a young child learning that, I think I'm living in a mythical reality. And it's tough, but it's the truth, right?
Delon, you shared with us that you actually had some kind of mixed feelings about Juneteenth.
Yeah, definitely. For me, I definitely didn't know what Juneteenth was growing up in Seattle, in between Kent and Federal Way. It wasn't something I really learned about till I was in college. I was probably 19 years old the first time I found out Seattle had Juneteenth celebrations, but I did learn, people tell you that it's the end of slavery, And I'm glad that the professor and my lady to the right are starting the foundation with the facts. So when I came here, I thought we were going to spend the whole night kind of lecturing, trying to build people up to get to the facts. But yeah, the fact is Juneteenth did not end slavery. The emancipation did not end slavery either. And as I traced my own family roots back into the 1800s in Mississippi, my family was on plantations. We actually bought our farm. But I just think what it would be like, if men arrive on horses and you're working and you're told that you should have been free 2 years ago, and like it was still until the December of '65 when a lot more states started to do it. So I think I would have been pissed off.
Right.
Like, if I'm just working, like they're in the fields or whatever they're doing, and the men arrive and tell them that they should have been free 2 years ago, like, I don't think I would have been ready to celebrate in that moment. And it's also there's so many facts. I wasn't sure which ones to bring out, but this also marked the beginning of sharecropping. So the important thing that I've been learning about Juneteenth is that this actually marked when the country did try to do things to actually have the black community be rebuilt. I think when I think of Juneteenth, I think in 1865, I think of Reconstruction when black folks were able to have own property in their own land, because in Juneteenth, it's like if you didn't have the opportunity to get land, now you have to work your way off of the farm. So just thinking about stuff like that. And also bringing it back to Washington, too. So while things are happening in the South, there's Juneteenth. As people travel along the Oregon Trail, Washington was actually founded because the black people, like George Washington Bush, were not allowed to own property in Oregon in the 1800s. But that actually lasted until like the 1920s. But we're talking about Juneteenth. So I just want to keep in frame, like people always talk about the South and the East and the North, but they don't necessarily talk about the Northwest when we talk about racial issues. So just keep in mind while all that is happening, people over here are still fighting to even own land, and there's no farms or slavery or anything, to that extent. So it's just like, it was like no man's land out here to be black for us, while in the South, it's just so many things going on. And so those are kind of some of the things I'm glad we could kind of get to at the beginning since we're laying the foundation with the facts. So yeah.
That's how I roll, Delon. We're going to get to the point. And thank you for this. And I already know I'm going to have to rewatch this a couple of times because I'm just getting all kinds of nuggets. But it all comes back down to education, right? So my next question is going to be focused on that. So Paul, I'm going to direct this to you, but I would also like Bianca to bounce off of this as well. So the question I have is, in general, has education at the high school and college level progressed in its teaching of Juneteenth and the Black experience in U.S. history? What remains missing in what we teach children and young adults?
Yeah, okay. Well, let me start with, I'll be interested in hearing what Bianca has to say about this as well. Let me just start with what's missing. So Juneteenth is inextricably connected to Black history, Black culture. Black culture, Black history is inextricably connected to American culture and American history. And so I think first and foremost, that's kind of that's part of what's missing, is that we don't really focus on the fact that Black history and Black culture is integral to who we are as a country. So I just wanted to say that first. But in terms of education, and let's just say Black history, I think that in higher education, we do have ethnic studies, multicultural education, but around the country, it's pretty spotty in terms of how that is offered. Of course, we have Bianca, and that gives you some sense that there is a focus in these important areas, but it's pretty spotty throughout the country. But we do have folks who are experts in these areas, and so our students at our colleges and universities have an opportunity to learn some of this history, some of this background. Now the K-12 system, we really have not done a good job at providing this type of education, especially Black history, but multicultural history, ethnic studies, those types of things. To give you an example, in the state of Washington, I'm actually on the State Board of Education for the state of Washington, and one of the things that we've talked about as a state board is implementing an ethnic studies requirement for our graduates. And, you know, it's really just been a starting point, but even with it just being a starting point, there's been a lot of pushback, a lot of concern, a lot of questions about whether or not it's needed, why is it needed, those types of things. And, you know, when we think about our educational system and, you know, our young people, you know, what we would hope for our young people is that they would be able to go to school, to engage in studies, and to really be able to have an opportunity to gain an understanding of who they are themselves, to learn about Juneteenth, and to get a sense of their own rich culture and history, and the fact that their history is a part of American history. And so I think we really have a long way to go there. I think we really have to put an emphasis on bringing about ethnic studies, multicultural studies in our schools, and Black studies, Black history, for sure. One other thing I'll say about higher education, what I'm seeing in higher education, you know, post our racial reckoning with the murder of Mr. Floyd, you know, there's been an increased emphasis on equity, diversity, and inclusion around the country, definitely in higher education. And so what we're seeing is that those individuals who have spent a lot of time teaching, writing, researching on ethnic studies in our colleges and universities, those individuals who didn't always get the kind of press and or focus that they should have gotten because of what they provide to American culture, now are really getting that focus because they are the experts. They've been here all the time. They've been doing this work. But now, because we need more understanding around equity, diversity, inclusion, we've turned to them and their expertise. What I'm interested in seeing is over the next 5 years or so is whether or not their work becomes more mainstream, whether their work becomes integral to our continued push towards understanding in this area, and whether or not it really becomes mainstreamed in terms of how we learn. And so that I'll be interested in seeing whether or not that comes about in the next 5 years or so.
Awesome.
Yes.
Bianca?
So I'd like to kind of jump off of the Chancellor's point about K through 12 education especially. So I teach UW's Civil War and Reconstruction course, and so I teach it annually. And this year I had, I think, 35 students in the class, and the first day of class, I teach it through the framework of W.E.B. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction. And so the first class, I asked the students to raise their hand if they had learned in an academic setting anything about Reconstruction, and 2 students raised their hand. And this is, it's, supposed to be an all K through 12 curriculum, or at least 9 through 12 curriculum, right, about American history. And so that was really stark for me, but actually thinking back to my own educational experience was kind of what had happened to me. I didn't learn about these things until college either. And so it made me kind of think about, when I was teaching this course, thinking about the importance of also helping our college students who will become teachers often, many are interested in that, see kind of these gaps in K through 12 education. And so I'm thinking about Kevin Levine's book about searching for Black Confederates, which is this book that came out kind of recently about the myth of the Black Confederate soldier that has kind of proliferated throughout, especially kind of like internet culture over the past 10, 15 years, and that it's this idea that there was a lot of Black Confederate soldiers when in fact there were not at all. And so that shows how even textbooks took up this myth from the internet and kind of cited these sources from the internet that were not grounded in historical evidence, were not grounded in archival sources, and that they were eventually had to be taken out of these textbooks, but physically the textbooks, people would have to go and take them out, so who knows if they even got taken out. But then also things like the controversy a few years ago about enslaved Africans being described as immigrants in textbooks for children about thinking about the transatlantic slave trade. And so these misrepresentations of history and distortion of historical facts, but honestly, at times just they're ideas that are not grounded in any evidence, right? How these are taught in academic settings, especially to young children, and how this kind of shapes their intellectual journey, their intellectual trajectory for thinking about things like, diversity, equity, and inclusion as they kind of live their lives. And so thinking about kind of this ethnic studies requirement, really starting it as early as possible, right? That's the foundation of what our educational system should be, right? To kind of address these misrepresentation, this kind of manipulation of history, in order to kind of help children in this country as they get their education see the complexities, and sometimes it's really horrifying, right? But that doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. And so that's what I think, for me, it was also really uplifting though to see how open my students were to talking about these really difficult subjects and to kind of reshaping their understandings of this history. So that was like a very positive point for me.
Good. Michelle, I want to, Paul, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit, and just to the end of what Bianca was saying. Yeah, and I think when we talk about Black history, I think sometimes there's the fear that it's going to be all negative. Well, not all Black history is negative. I mean, there's some really positive things that have happened in Black history. And if we talk about Charles Drew and his influence on hemoglobin, and Elijah McCoy and how he influenced the industrial era, and George Washington Carver and all of his patents and his influence on Tuskegee. I mean, there's just so much rich history that gets missed, and when we're thinking about how we want to engage young people, when they're sitting around in story time, those are the kind of stories that they want to hear, So I just wanted to add that part too.
Yeah, thanks. Michelle, I want to kind of lead into adult education here and ask why all of this isn't better known, particularly among white culture, and maybe that's more of a mystery and not fair to ask you to solve. But what are your thoughts about why what's taken so long for a realization to begin?
Oh, thanks for that one, John. Appreciate it.
Easy question.
I kind of want to start where Paul was just taking us, which is that there is much to celebrate with respect to African American and Black folks' contributions and achievements to American culture, American history, American life, modern America as we know it. But we as a country have not been asked to celebrate Black people, have not been asked to celebrate Black achievement, have not been asked to celebrate Black contribution. And what we've already been hearing, thank you, I think we really have to reflect on that for a moment. What we really have been hearing, and the other panelists have been talking about this as well, is that, see, there was this thing called slavery, and then it ended, and let's move on. And that opportunity to really explore what enslavement meant for Black people and for our country is a missed opportunity. But what it also means is that, again, what has become the most important thing that we look at is the achievements of white folks in this country. And I think that's just an objective statement. I hope we're really not going to have to contest it right now. So what I would like to suggest is that this is a loss to everyone, that we haven't understood what Black people have brought to this country. And that means it's a loss for white people. And that means that there's this partial, incomplete story that in many ways doesn't quite make sense. The way Stephen was talking about, so, Texas ended slavery, the end. But it also, see how it set him on a complete life trajectory to understand better how these stories get told with huge pieces missing. I also want to say, John, that there's something called the lost cause belief in the United States. We've heard a little bit about that too from Bianca, which is where somehow the Confederacy lost the Civil War, but they won the cultural battle of telling the narrative of what's been going on in this country for hundreds of years with respect to Black people's negligible contributions, we'll put it that way. So the lost cause, as we've been hearing about textbooks and education just now, has been very powerful in telling a completely different narrative about how American life has evolved. You were mentioning, Bianca, some things about, people hear about Black folks as enslaved people were really brought during the Middle Passage as immigrants. Well, something that I've heard is that Black people during enslavement were servants. And that if you go to some of the plantations in the South that have opened themselves up to doing tourism, plantation tourism, you may not ever hear about the servants. You may not ever hear about the servant cabins, and you may not ever hear about how the plantation made its wealth. You're going to hear a lot of stories about, the history of white folks in the area, but you may never hear about the history of Black people. So that is a very American way in which we talk about who we are. We leave out enormous pieces of the story because they're not just uncomfortable, but they're violent, they're oppressive, they are contradictory to the founding documents of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And so folks have decided, rather than try to make sense of the contradictory impulses of the United States, let's just leave stuff out. So I think, John, that's just the beginning of an answer as to why a lot of white people don't know about Juneteenth. And my cautionary tale is, please, Juneteenth isn't about commercialization, and it isn't about sales on that day. Go down to what used to be Macy's and have a great Juneteenth sale. It isn't about that at all. We do not want what has been happening to Cinco de Mayo to become Juneteenth. By the way, I think we want to reclaim what Cinco de Mayo is all about.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, man, so many thoughts going through my head right now, but definitely think of John's question. Just it's not just Juneteenth. I think there's just a lot of things in Black history that the white people who invented, our education system just don't want people to know. Like they always talk about the transatlantic slave trade, but they don't necessarily talk about the native Black dark-skinned people who were here that were kidnapped and put on farms and plantations. But yeah, but like we should, like, this is a celebration, right? So it's like, how can someone be a Civil War buff? There's people that dedicate their whole lives to the Civil War, World War I, World War II. They make models, but then they don't even teach about Reconstruction that followed right after that. You know what I'm saying? Like that's an exciting period, because you think of Reconstruction this in the 1860s, but there's plenty of times throughout history when black people have been trying to, it's not just Reconstruction of our community, it's literally Reconstruction brought the North and the South back together. If you think about it, black people, us going through this is the reason why things are coming back together, and it's the reason why also like Jim Crow and stuff started. And also think about like the kids, like my kids are here, so they're not gonna wait until college to learn about Juneteenth like I did. And also think about what Paul said that up until like the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, like people like equity work never really was taken serious as a field of study. But if we were up here all chemists talking about atoms, and things like that, and electrons and protons, there wouldn't even be a Q&A. Everybody would just accept what we said as facts. But when it comes to equity, people love to challenge us, you know what I'm saying? But we have the facts and the figures to go with it. But, someone takes like a 30-minute training on microaggressions, and now they think they've solved all the problems. But, so I'm glad everybody's here and open to what we're saying. And, just want to be more open to black history. You talk about some great black inventors. The first person that comes to mind is Mark Dean. He owns like 3 of the original 9 patents on the personal computer. So it's not just contributions from the past. There's literal things that we should be celebrating in modern day history, I guess you want to call it, that black people are contributing. And this Juneteenth conversation is just kind of sparking a lot of that.
No, I was gonna say, I'm glad you said that, and I'm gonna tell you, I'm a little set off by what you said, but in a good way, because I'm gonna tell you, in my now exiting role, I took on the role in my organization as the Chief Development Now Equity Officer, and I fought that. I never wanted to do DEI work because of some of what you said, and I think there's this sense of, let's put the brown person, let's make the black person the person that does equity in the organization. And I'm like, no. Or there's a sense of, it has to be that person, and because they know all the things. I don't know all the things. None of us know all the things. But I hated that concept of the African-American person, the brown person in the organization that's higher up. That's the chief role you can give them. Not chief financial officer, not chief, CEO, but DEI, yes, it's got to be that person. And I fought really hard to avoid all that, even in the community work that I do, because I didn't want that to be the default position of that's the kind of work Alicia could do, or that's the kind of work that any of us with this color skin could do. And it's trying to break that stereotype of that. But I took the role temporarily because of someone that left, and I actually appreciated the fact that my boss, who was a white woman, who stalks my Alicia and Edmonds page, and she knows all the things that I do, she purposely did not ask me to do it. And the fact that she didn't ask me to do it is why I volunteered to do it. Because she understood and respected my position on it. And as much as she wanted to ask me to do it, she knew not to. And I respected her for that. So I'm actually kind of glad I'm leaving that particular role. But I think that's a stereotype that needs to be busted in nonprofit and corporate America, is that the only type of roles you can promote persons of color into in C-suites or C-level positions is the equity role. And I get that a lot in even, serving on the planning board and serving on the airport commission. And the bewildered looks I would get from people when they're like, when I tell them I'm on a board, like, oh, you're on a diversity commission? No. You're on this one? No. I'm like, I'm on a planning board. Why? Why not? Why can't I be into land use? Why can't I be into master planning? Why can't I be into, technology? Why are those the things that we default put people into that are persons of color, that is what they're supposed to be? Waxed off, thank you. Now I'm going to go into my next, but that does dovetail into my next question. But go ahead, Paul.
Can I push back on that?
Yeah, you can. Go for it.
All right. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Because I think that that role can be a very powerful role within an organization. And I think especially now, it's a vital role because we really want that role to disappear, into an organization, because the issues around equity, diversity, and inclusion, we're able to deal with those as an organization because we have a better understanding. But you have to have a person in that position who does have an understanding of the importance of equity, diversity, and inclusion to be able to help integrate it into the organization. And I would argue that that role is very integral to any type of strategic planning that you do within the organization. And so it is, but it can be difficult, and it can be, it could be off-putting depending on the organization that you're in, but it is a vital role.
No, it absolutely is. And I'll say even in my current organization, that's what we're doing right now around strategic planning. And we created an EDIA council. I think my thing is that I just don't want that to be the default position. I don't want to see an all-white C-suite with the only person of color being the diversity and equity officer, and to be able to move that along. But I totally
Unless you're
understand.
telling them what to do.
Exactly. And I like to tell people what to do.
Dawn, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just saying, I'm not gonna lie. When I applied to become an instructor, in my interview, I had to tell them, like, I do great work in the Diversity and Equity Center, but I want you all to see me as a colleague now as I become an instructor, in STEM education. Like, I don't know if it was a preconceived notion or not, but I felt like it was something I had to let be known. Like please don't pigeonhole me professionally.
And I think that's what it was for me. But I do want to move into the corporate question. And I think part of that is because in my career, I started out in corporate banking, and even though I did in this nonprofit space and in doing fundraising, my specialty has been around corporate philanthropy. So and that's how I know Steve. And so when it became a federal holiday, I was really looking at what companies, what organizations were going to adopt Juneteenth as an official holiday, whether they're going to acknowledge it or not. And especially in the Seattle area with the larger organizations. And it was really interesting to see ones that were like, nope, some that were like, yep, and some that were kind of in the middle. And I found what Alaska was doing was pretty unique, which is one of the main reasons I wanted to, reach out. He was actually one of the first people I talked to about doing this panel. So my question for you, Steve, as a servant leader, as he will tell you, how did Alaska Air Group mark Juneteenth, and how does it compare to the recognition of other holidays? I know the answer, but I want you to say it.
Well, Juneteenth, first of all, I'll say it started at Alaska 3 years ago, so before my time there. And it started within our business resource group, which is ABIA, Air Group Black Employees and Allies, and they wanted to have an opportunity to teach about Juneteenth. So they asked about, is this something we can set up in the break rooms, and can we try to teach this message and share what this day means. So this was before it became nationally recognized kind of federal holiday there. But so this year, there was a lot of planning since we're kind of back from COVID, and how do we approach this? So first of all, I will say I am not part of that planning group because culturally it's not my story to tell. So I do work as more of a servant leader in that piece where, I can help with logistics and things like that, but I do not do the planning personally. That still lives within our business resource group and other members of my team and my director who decided really the way we want to approach it at Alaska is we want to approach it as a time for education, and we want to be able to give people in our company an opportunity to learn what this means. So a few things happened. First of all, we hosted a poetry jam, which we brought in a couple of very incredible Black poets who, through spoken word, shared both the pain and the beauty of what Juneteenth is, and then they also had a time where they talked about their stories, and they talked about, and I mean, these were incredible stories that you're hearing about from segregation times until now, and kind of their own journeys and coming out into the world in just really incredible time. Q&A sessions for the employees to experience. And then, of course, there was a celebratory piece at the end, so there was food. I was one of the people who served food and put food on plates, so that was kind of my role there. We recorded the session, and we'll have it available for employees, but again, it's a learning opportunity, so instead of just kind of posting a link somewhere, we're having watch parties so that people can watch and have live chat and discussion, and that's going to be led again by colleagues of mine on the team. Another thing is that we did become the official airline partner for the Juneteenth Foundation in Washington, D.C., but that brings us to another piece, which is trying to be careful not to commercialize the holiday and to turn it into a marketing piece for us. So we were very proud to have been selected as the airline partner, especially since some of the other airlines who put a bid in are a little larger and more well-known, especially on the East Coast than we are, but because of some of the really work that Alaska's been trying to do, we were selected to come in, but we did not make it public news. I know, Alicia, you know this because you were looking for the post. So we did not post about it in advance. Nobody on our DEI team, nobody from our ABIA BRG were posting, you know, we're doing this, we're going to Washington, D.C. This was something that they did. A couple of my colleagues and members of ABIA who were those individuals who started the conversation 3 years ago. They traveled to DC, took part in those events, and then on June 20th, which is the officially recognized day this year, we just made a post that said, by the way, we went to this event. We were the sponsor. It was a very brief post. It had some photos, kind of wrapped it back to this is why business resource groups are important. And on June 19th, we shared just a very basic video that was just videos of our Black employees who were talking about what Juneteenth meant to them. So it was just important for us that that day did not turn into, you know, a marketing ploy for us. It was approached carefully, I think, for the way our employees take it. Unlike maybe some of our other holidays where, you know, our executive leaders might send out a letter and say, you know, for anybody who celebrates Christmas, you know, Merry Christmas, and there's balloons and there's stuff, and maybe you get the day off. Maybe you don't, you know, if you're working in the airport, you know, you get to work every day of the year. But that's another piece, day off. What does that mean? So we're still very early in how we're planning this and how we're approaching it. And because our airport employees are represented by 4 different unions, holidays are negotiated through the union. So that's something that will be in future discussions. But what we kind of approached for now for our corporate and back office employees is that starting next year, they'll have a floating holiday that they can use for whatever they'd like. And that may not be where we land permanently, but for the time being, there's a lot of really mixed feelings about how Juneteenth should be celebrated and who should get the day off and what should that day off be. And so for now, this was kind of where we thought this would be the most appropriate way, and then in the future, we'll continue to look at what to do.
Great, thanks. Michelle, let's talk a little bit about who has been responsible for carrying on the history of Juneteenth and the part that Black women played in continuing that tradition.
Yes, thanks for that question. I think it's really important for people to remember that during enslavement times, which started in the 17th century in this country, Black women were not only asked to nurture white families, they were asked to neglect their own. And what is most important about that horrible, terrible dilemma is that, of course, black women didn't neglect their families. They didn't neglect their children. They didn't neglect their elders and their aunties and the men that were putting their lives on the line for enslavement. They always found a way to nurture and support and make sure that we survived. And I want to say that that is how Juneteenth continues to come to us, because Juneteenth, certainly for black women, is an opportunity to make sure that the community is strong and resilient and surviving. So Bianca was explaining, that Juneteenth was migrating from southern communities, as folks from those communities migrated north in looking for employment opportunities, and also to escape the violent oppression that was still happening in the South after the end of the Civil War. So many customs and practices and community resilience practices were taken north as well, and often by black women through black church and other community. So that when we think about Juneteenth, we know that at times it sort of seemed to be a quieter holiday, depending on where people were landing in moving themselves and their families to better opportunities. And at other times, there were incredible revivals of Juneteenth. And I think that when I first learned about Juneteenth, it was probably in one of those revival moments with the civil rights movement of the 1960s going on into the 1970s, where black communities were making sure that we are going to use Juneteenth as an education piece and as a community celebration and resilience piece. And so many times that resides with women making sure that that happens, right? Not saying anything about men not doing their share, simply saying that women make sure that that happens. So that resiliency is really important. But I want to just say the other thing about this is that the mythology of the strong black woman is also a part of sometimes how outsiders see what's happening in the black community. That idea that strong black women who are muscling through pain and grief and loss of opportunity, loss of lives in the community, through humiliation, through lack of opportunity, etc., that somehow the strong black woman is just going to conquer it all, and that's going to be a good thing. And I want to remind us that when we put that kind of a stereotype on an entire community of people, we are dehumanizing them. Right? You can't really see black women if you've got this mythology about the strong black woman, and no matter what we pile on her, she's going to come through it. So I just want to say that the other part then of women in our community taking on Juneteenth and making sure that it not only survives but thrives as this so important celebration is that our humanity be seen. The revival, most recent revival through COVID of Juneteenth has come on a lot of pain and a lot of reflection, again, about what it means to be black in the United States, what it means to celebrate Juneteenth, knowing that there's so much still missing from our lives in terms of being seen as full and complete citizens of the United States, and looking forward to the 4th of July and what do we do with that. So I just want us to be really clear that as we talk about the resilience of black women, we really remember that this is a centuries-long gift that we've offered the United States. We're still taking care of you, right? I was lucky enough to be in New York City a couple days, because I'm really a Brooklyn girl, not just the Michigan or Seattle thing. And on Juneteenth, and I was in Central Park looking at all those black women taking care of all those little white babies and toddlers. It was a beautiful thing. Those kids are being nurtured, but it reminded me of how many hundreds of years there's been caretaking by our community of women, and not always our community of women being taken care of.
So my next question actually is going to come from Slido, so thank you for those who have been submitting questions. But it actually kind of bounces off of what you just said, Michelle, in the realm of appropriateness, right? As we're starting to wrap our arms as a nation around Juneteenth being a federal holiday, there's already been debate about, do you say Happy Juneteenth? Or like you would say, Happy 4th of July? Like, what is that? And I think it's gonna vary by person, right? Because everyone, has their own feeling about this. So the question I have for everybody, and I'll start with Bianca, then Delon, then Steve, then Michelle, and then Paul, the question is, as a white woman, is it appropriate for me to wear a Juneteenth shirt on Juneteenth? Let's start with Bianca. I don't think there's necessarily a wrong answer, but I think, again, it's one of those things about what's appropriate for a particular person.
I think that one of the and I think what we've been talking about so much today is the importance of education and the importance of kind of having a grounding, right, in what you're discussing, what you're thinking about, what you're talking about, having those kind of pulling on information that is kind of vetted, right? And so thinking about, celebrating Juneteenth, it is the celebration of kind of Black folks' contribution to not only what the United States is, but if we think of it, it is a global, right, story. And so thinking about kind of celebrating, I guess it would be why you would want to wear the T-shirt would be, I guess, my response to that. Is it to celebrate? Then if so, do you want to spark conversation, especially amongst people who may not know what Juneteenth is? And then do you feel ready to talk about these topics kind of thoughtfully and with care? And so I think that is kind of where I would fall on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think it kind of goes into some things we're talking about with corporate responsibility too. Because I'm glad to see companies like Alaska Airlines, kind of celebrating Juneteenth, because I think especially for white people, it's like kind of what we do at work around holidays kind of helps us figure out how to do it in our personal lives too. So I think of someone white wearing a Juneteenth shirt, I think of like people having Black Lives Matter in their emails, and like I think it's pretty. For me, it's always like it definitely makes you wonder and like almost makes you want to ask why. But I think it's okay. Just I would just hope if you would wear a shirt like that or hang a Black Lives Matter flag in your yard that you're about that life. And if you're ever in a position where you can help, a young person of color as Black, brown, or indigenous, that, you'll give them that respect that they deserve, and not just wearing the shirt because it's fun, but, understand the meaning behind it, Yeah, I think that's a good question, though. That was a great question.
Okay. As the white DEI specialist, I get questions. I get questions like this a lot because the white folk decide, they can come and ask me that stuff, which is true. I'm going to co-sign what both of the other panelists said already. I think there is something to be celebrated about the fact that we as a nation can look at a day like Juneteenth and say, yes, we want to move forward and we want to do better, but you need to educate yourself. If you're going to wear that shirt, yes, be ready to talk about it. Know your history. Take the time. Don't just put something on to be performative. And please, to my white friend out there, if you're going to put that shirt on, at least get it from a Black-owned business. And not from Walmart. Okay? Let's not do that. And that's Steve, that's not Alaska Airlines, so I don't know if we have a partnership with them or not. Well, but don't.
Well, and Walmart got into some trouble by selling Juneteenth ice cream, so.
Stolen Juneteenth ice cream. But we won't go there right there. That's a whole nother thing. That's what I'll say.
I would add one, and make sure, that's why I wore the red tie today. I was learning that red is the color of Juneteenth. So if you do get a Juneteenth shirt, try to get it in red. You're supposed to eat red food and drink red drink. That's part of it.
I'm going to ask people to think about this for a moment, because I don't have a direct answer for you. But a young Black actor, Amanda Stenberg, some years ago, posed a question. You may know her from having starred as Rue in the Hunger Games. I think she was also in The Hate You Give. And the question that she posed, I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, was, what would America be like if we loved black people as much as we love their culture, their music, their food? So in asking that question, she was asking people to reflect on what kind of cultural appropriation is always happening for black people's values and things that are important to us that white people take on without fully understanding. So I'm sort of endorsing this idea of, do you understand what Juneteenth means before you put on that t-shirt? Can you explain it? Have you really incorporated its meaning into who you are? So I would ask for some critical reflection as you think about putting that shirt on.
So I have a question. Can we add like a workshop with that T-shirt? Yeah. Maybe add a. No, really. No, I think I would go back to what Delon is saying, in that when I think I would be okay with it, but I would hope that that individual would explore more about the history, would have some knowledge and background, and that would take on the type of role of intervening in when there's issues related to race, being the type of person that would speak up, speak out, when you have those whispers that are negative and stereotypical and prejudice, that they would be the kind of person that would come forth and step in and just continue to educate themselves.
You get one last question, sir.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe this would be a good one, and again, a response from everybody. What should we be thinking about Juneteenth and considering that history as we're celebrating the 4th of July? And let's go the other direction. We'll start with you, Paul.
Yeah. I think what's really important about both of those dates, they're definitely celebrations, but at the core, what both of those are about freedom. It's about freedom, and it's about freedom in the United States of America. And so those two dates definitely have a connection, and they have importance to our country. Yep.
For me, as a lawyer, the 4th of July has always been really interesting because I see the Declaration of Independence as a statement of aspiration. In other words, it's not a static document, it's dynamic. We are going to improve as a country in a way that the Founding Fathers couldn't even have imagined. So I see Juneteenth then as also trying to answer Frederick Douglass's question from his 1852 speech about, what does it mean to the slave to celebrate the 4th of July? And if you guys ever have a chance to look at that, it is a model of rhetoric. It's absolutely brilliant, and it asks all the questions we're still asking today. Are black people fully a part of the United States? Are they fully a part of the rights that the rest of us have? So on the 4th of July, for many years, I've been thinking a lot of those thoughts are we where we're supposed to be as a country if we use the Declaration of Independence as our evolutionary document. The last thing I'd like to say is that my daughter was born on the 4th of July. I did not plan that. She was supposed to be born in August, so things got a little out of whack. But all these years later, she keeps asking me, why did you do that to me? This is a difficult holiday. I don't know what to do with it. And I know that every year she's reflecting on the meaning for her as a young black person of the 4th of July. So there's a lot of pondering and reflection that goes on in our house on that day. But Juneteenth, that's a celebratory day.
Well, I think, and for especially the the white people here and those who are watching, I would say I know that 4th of July is that celebratory moment, and I would hope that with Juneteenth now, many of you maybe are experiencing that for the first time, or it's new to you, that you really would use that as your pathway to education, to really understand where we still need to go to fully have a true Independence Day. And you know, we have, as white people, we have power and privilege, 2 words I use a lot in DEI, and words that are often trigger words, but they're not bad words, and we can talk about that at the reception after, so come for me, it's okay, we'll talk about it. But really think about that on the 4th of July. Think about what part are you playing to help us get to where we need to be, and it's gonna start with, you know, the United States is not a bad country. Like all countries, it's growing and it's changing and it's progressing, but get out of that mythological country that we're protecting, that mythological history that doesn't really exist. Think about what are you doing to be that change, because we need to be part of that.
Yeah, for me, definitely. I think this is a great way to celebrate right in the middle of Juneteenth and 4th of July, especially like, you know, for Black people. I definitely think of, you know, this is kind of the answer to, you know, Frederick Douglass's conversation about what 4th of July means to Black people. You know, it gives, because, you know, there's Black people native to this land, and there's Black nationalism. I see my man right here with the Malcolm X hat and the work of, you know, Marcus Garvey. I think this is a win for Black nationalism. It gives, like I said, there's so many, like Bianca said, there's so many days we probably could have pulled out and called it the Independence Day for Black people, but I'm just, you know, I'm kind of still grappling toward like which one should we choose, but it's like at least we have one. At least we have a day to say we're proud and we're from here. You know, this is the day that we got our freedom. And I was watching, and I've just been watching a lot of Juneteenth. We were listening to Juneteenth in the car on the day of with the kids, and somebody mentioned we should just celebrate, you know, kind of like the 12 days of Christmas, just celebrate from Juneteenth till the 4th of July, you know, and we just have 2 weeks long celebration.
That was kind of my mindset, I'm going to tell you. That was literally kind of my mindset about the Bridging the Gap thing last year, so absolutely.
So yeah, definitely think of like the Pan-Africanism. So if you're going to wear that Juneteenth shirt, you know, that's one thing you should learn about is Pan-Africanism, and, you know, the red, green, black flag, and yeah, and we should be able to light off fireworks on Juneteenth too, I think. Yeah.
If it's not banned. Okay. Bianca?
I agree with everything that's been said. I think that one of the things is that it is important for, you know, people to think about why the 4th of July is not enough on the 4th of July, right? Why thinking about that as an Independence Day is kind of a misnomer. It was independence for some, but not for all. And I think that it is, and not for all is kind of the foundation of a lot of the parts of the United States, right? That we need to think about what was built on the enslavement and the kind of subjugation of Black folks, Indigenous folks in the United States in order for that kind of independence of the United States kind of be made. It didn't have to be, right? We do that in my classes. We think about like, this is how it happened, but these are people's choices. These are people's actions. So that it's not predetermined. So reflecting on the 4th of July, kind of how and why that happened the way it happened, and kind of what we want to make for, going forward. And then Ms. Osborne had noted the Frederick Douglass speech, and so I've linked it in for further reference that I have uploaded, or that's going to get uploaded tomorrow. But I just wanted to end with one of his like final quotes is, "I therefore leave off where I began, with hope. While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is also cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do not now stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot around in the same old paths of its fathers without interference. The time was when such could be done. Long established customs of hurtful character could formally fence themselves in and do their evil work with social impunity. And then we're going to cut because it is beautiful and long. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other. And so thinking about kind of what we've been talking about here about Pan-Africanism, but also these connections, thinking about kind of within aspirations of the United States of kind of this idea of liberty and freedom, kind of how many of these ideas are often viewed in terms of other people's unfreedom, their inability to kind of experience the freedoms, the full freedoms. And so thinking about kind of, as we've mentioned here, the complexities of kind of what American liberty is and who it excludes and how this has changed over time and kind of what future we want to make and how we want to make it different. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John, do you want to answer that question as a final thought?
I guess that's only fair. I have, when I first started hearing about Juneteenth, I really took an interest in learning what I could about it, and to read again Frederick Douglass's "What Does the 4th of July Mean to a Slave?" God, that hurts to read that, and I'd like to think that we can use Juneteenth as a way to honestly celebrate the 4th of July, and to be able to feel like we're at least on a path toward realizing those truths and recognizing equality for everybody. So,
thank you. I'll close this out on a couple of different things. One is kind of to Delon's point. When I was thinking about bridging the gap, it's like how can we celebrate? It's not a long period of time between the two dates, and what can we do as communities, as groups, to kind of keep that going between those 2 days, so it doesn't have to be another separate but equal, or that you have to pick one over the other, that they are intertwined. And we know there are other ethnic independence days, throughout the year. But specifically with these two, because they are so connected and intertwined, as been said here, is that, again, my hope is that there's maybe like thoughts and brainstorming that can happen, within people's homes, within the schools, within the communities, to go, what can we do here going forward in the future years to be able to honor both, right? And I will say, too, I didn't want to be controversial, but it is me. It is not lost on me, we planned this months ago, but it is not lost on me that in this moment right now, as we're talking about independence and freedoms, that we're also experiencing some losses of independence and freedoms for certain groups right now. And whatever your thought about it is, the reality is someone is affected. Black persons' freedoms were affected, when July 4th came around. And, it's not a done deal. And we know that something that's written, in stone doesn't mean that it doesn't get blasted off. And so I hope that as we've had this conversation tonight, in the midst, or if you watch it later, and in the midst of what's happening in our country right now, the greatest country in the world, where some feel like we're losing freedoms and we're going backwards. And some like, well, that's fine, that's what we want. I mean, there's always going to be push and pull. And I think I'm not encouraging anyone to not engage in the push and pull. But I want to say is engage in thoughtful and meaningful conversation, and to be able to understand where another person's feelings and experiences are coming from. And that takes humility, that takes respect. So my hope tonight is that as we have this respectful engagement with one another with the push-pull, and I think push-pull is healthy, because that's how we learn. I've learned so much on this stage tonight from each and every person, and I hope that you have as well. I think whether I ran a leadership program or whatever I've done, my hope is always that if someone leaves the room knowing something they didn't know before, just one thing, then it was a successful event. So I would say by applause, humor me. If you learned one thing tonight that you didn't know before, then that means this was worth it, that the planning was worth it, that those that have shown up tonight, this is worth it, because we're walking away with something, a nugget. You don't even have to agree with the nugget, but you learned something that you didn't know before. At least makes you go, let me go look that up and see if they're telling the truth. That's fine. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you, John, all of you for being here. Bianca, I'm glad you're feeling better. Please go back to the crankedup.co website. The Snow Isle Libraries provided us with a ton of different digital and printed resources to go back and look at Juneteenth. You can see the profiles of all of our speakers, and if you want to reach out to them, let me know. I'll connect you. And we'll also upload Bianca's information that she spoke to about tomorrow as well. So we want this to be a living thing. So continue to share it out on your networks. Go back and rewatch it and go back and see what someone said. Thank you, ECA, for hosting us and feeding us tonight. And thank you, everyone at home or wherever you are that's watching. Again, completely appreciate you taking the time and energy to be here with us tonight. And so with that, we're going to close it.
Happy Independence Days.
Yes, happy Independence Days.
Happy Juneteenth.
That was great.